Welcome to this 1-hour course on creating a low poly game in Unity. Believe it or not, in 1 hour you are going to create the game you see before you. You will use Blender to create the terrain, trees and rocks, MagicaVoxel to create the player and ghost models, then you will use some simple scripts to bind your creations into this great looking click to move game. Once you have completed this course, you will have taken a great stride towards your goal of becoming a great game developer. So there are 3 pieces of software that you need for this course. There's Unity, so go to unity3d.com, click on the Get Unity button and follow the instructions to download and install Unity. Then you'll need Blender, so go to blender.org, click on the Download Blender button and follow the instructions to download and install Blender. And then finally there's MagicaVoxel, which you want to go to ephtracy.github.io and then download the version that's correct for your OS and install that on your computer. And then you should be ready to go. So let's open Unity, and then if we click on this new button here, and I'm going to save my project in this folder here, but save yours wherever you like. And then I'm going to call my game low poly click to move. And then if you click create project, so first of all your layout may not look exactly like mine, so if you want it to look like this, you want to click on this layout drop down box here and choose 2 by 3. That's the layout that I like to use. And then if you go into the assets folder and if you right click that, and let's get super organized here and create some folders. So if we go create folder, and I put all my stuff under a folder called game, and I like to have this view here look more like a folder view, so if you grab this slider and slide this all the way to the left. Now under the game folder we're going to create some more folders, so we're going to create a models folder, so let's do that. And then I also want to right click in here, left click create folder, and I'm going to create a scripts folder. Now inside the models folder I'm going to right click create folder, and I'm going to create an enemy folder, and then I'm going to right click and create a player folder, and then I'm going to right click and create a rocks folder, and then a terrain folder, and then a tree folder. And then I'm going to hit File, Save Scene As, and under Game I'm going to save my scene as main scene, since we're only going to have the one scene, and then click Save. And that about does it for our initial setup. So we're going to create our player character now in an application called MagicaVoxel. So when you go into MagicaVoxel, you will be faced with a block of voxels 40 by 40 by 40. And we want to adjust that because our character is going to be a lot smaller than that. So if we adjust the size down to 9 by 1 by 9 voxels, like so. Now you can scroll in using the scroll wheel, and if you hold down the middle mouse button you can pan around like so, and if you hold the right mouse button you can rotate like that. So you want to erase all these voxels, so if you make sure that erase is highlighted, and then if you hit the F button here, and with one click all our voxels will disappear. So now we want to go into voxel mode, and click on attach. And so we want to count 2 in from here, and on the third one in we want to place a voxel, then another 2, and then place another voxel like so. Then if you click and hold, you can draw a line of voxels like so, and then click and hold and draw another line of voxels on top of that, and again. And then we want to do the head, which is 3 lines of voxels like so, and then the hair, another line like that. Now we want to paint these voxels, so if we click on the paint button here, and if we choose palette 2, I want to use this pink color here to paint his feet, his hands, and his face pink. And then I'm going to make everything else, his hair and his t-shirt, black. And then I'm going to give him a couple of black eyes like so. So we have our basic guy, and that's his idle position. But we actually want him to do a bit of walking around, so we're going to add another frame of animation. So if we click on this drop down here, we can see that we can add another frame of animation here. So if we click on this plus button, we now have 2 frames of animation that are identical. So make sure that the second one is selected. And then we want to select all these voxels, so if we click on this box here, and then click on rect, and click and hold, and we can select all our voxels like so. And then if we click on this button here, and if we hold down the control key, and then click and drag up one, we've moved all our voxels up a line. And if we switch between the 2 frames, we can see that he looks like he's jumping up and down. So let's fix that now. So make sure the second frame is highlighted, and then if we just erase these voxels here, and then if we click attach, and then we want to draw in a line of voxels here like so, and then a couple more there, and then we just want to paint these bottom couple of voxels pink like so. And then if we click between the 2, we can see that we've got a very simple walk animation going on there. So let's export these models to Unity now. So if we go back to Unity, and let's just grab our path that we're going to put our player in. So this is the folder we're going to put our player in. If we right click and do show in Explorer, and then if we go into the player folder by double clicking, and then we want to select our path, and then Control C to copy, and then when we go back to MagicaVoxel, we can click on export, and we want to export this as an OBJ file, and then if we paste in our path here and hit enter, and let's call this player underscore idle, click save, and then if we go to the second frame, again export OBJ, and we want to call this player underscore walk like so. And then let's actually save the model as well, just in case you want to come back and edit it at some point. So if we click save up here, and again we can paste in that path just so we keep everything together, and we're going to call this player. Now we're actually going to cheat a bit and use this second frame for our ghost character, our enemy. So what we can do there is we can simply make sure our paint button is highlighted and then click on white, seeing as all ghosts are obviously white, and then let's just paint this all white like so, and then for some reason we'll give him orange eyes. And we don't want to overwrite our player models, so if we go save as this time and go back to models, and this is an enemy, so go into there and we'll call him Ghost. Click save, and let's export the actual OBJ. Again, go to models, enemy, and we'll call this Ghost. So jumping back to Unity, we can see that we now have in our player folder player idle and player walk, and in our enemy folder we have a ghost. But one thing we'll notice, if we expand Ghost, we can see that actually we have a mesh that's called default, and then if we go to player and expand those, we also have meshes called default there, which can get a bit confusing. So let's fix that now. So if we right click and show in Explorer, and then if we right click the ghost.obj file and edit it with your favorite text editor, I used Notepad++, so click on that, and what we can simply do is specify that we want our group to be called Ghost, so G space Ghost, and if we save that and go back to Unity, we can see that that has fixed that problem. So let's repeat that for the player. So again, right click, show in Explorer, go to player idle.obj, right click, edit with Notepad, G space player underscore idle, click save, and do the same for player walk, right click, edit with Notepad, G space player underscore walk, click save. Go back to Unity and we see that that's fixed that. Now to use these models, we simply drag and drop from the project folder into the hierarchy, and we can see that we have our player now in our scene. Now one thing that's perhaps not obvious is that this player is actually pretty big. If we right click and go to 3D object and cube, we can see that compared to a Unity cube, our player is absolutely massive. So the easiest way to fix that is to come to player idle and change this scale factor from 1 to 0.1, and then if we click apply, then we can see that our player, let's just move our cube onto the player, so click reset, and we can see that our player now is roughly the size of a cube. So let's do that with player walk as well. So 0.1, click apply, and then let's go to enemy and the ghost, 0.1, and apply. And we can delete our cube now. Right, so let's get our player walking now. So if we rename this game object to player, and let's rename the game object underneath the player to get player model, because this actually holds the mesh that we're going to swap out to make it look like our player is walking. So essentially we're going to be changing this between player idle and player walk, like so. So let's just zoom into our player like that, and then you can see that if we swap between player idle and player walk, it will look like he's walking along. So the way we can do that is I've got a script which we can drag into our scripts folder. So I have a script called animesh, which we are going to attach to our player model game object. So make sure player model is selected, click add component, and then if you just start typing animesh, we should find that there, like so. And let me just show you how this works. So if we create an animation, and we will call this walk, and we'll say that the frame time is 0.2 seconds, and it consists of two meshes, the first one being our idle mesh and the second one being our walk mesh. And if we say that our current animation is walk, then if we hit play, there you go, our character is walking along. Now let's create another animation. So if we change this to 2, that will create another animation, and it just copies the information from the previous one, which is the walk one. So let's actually change this one to idle, and idle only consists of one frame of animation, and that is the player idle. So the way this works, if we hit play now, we can go from walk to idle just simply by changing this parameter, like so. Now let's get our player moving. So I have a click to move script that will help with that. So we want to attach the click to move script to our player, not our player model, our actual player. So we can click add component like we did last time, or another way we can do it is just drag and drop our click to move script onto our game object, like so. We want to change layer mask floor to everything. So we actually want to add another component to our player game object. So if you click on add component, and if you just start typing NAV, you'll see nav mesh agent appear, and you want to click on that to add the nav mesh agent to our player. We can see that his height's a little high, so we can change that to 1, and that will fix that. And then we want to create a plane to give him something to walk on. So if we right click in the hierarchy window and choose 3D object plane, and if we just click on reset here just to reset the transform, and let's just make sure the player is standing on the plane, like so. Now with the plane selected, if we go to window and navigation, and if we click on navigation static, make sure plane is selected, then click on navigation static, and then if we go to bake and click on bake, that will create a nav mesh on our plane, like so. And then we can close the navigation tab, and we should be ready to test our click to move script. Now if we hit the play button and we click on the plane, we can see that our player moves on the plane, but he's looking a bit weird the way he's moving around. And the reason for this is that he's not really facing the way he's moving, he's facing sort of side on. So we can fix that easily by rotating him 90 degrees. So if you click on the player model, and then all you need to do is type in 90 here, And then now if you click play, you can see that he's moving and facing in the correct way. Now I still want to make a few more tweaks here, so let's make some changes to the nav mesh agent. I want him to turn around a lot quicker, so let's up the angular speed to 1000, and I want him to accelerate a lot quicker, so we'll change that to 100. And now if we hit play, you can see that that's looking a little bit more sensible. You can also see that he's sort of floating across the surface a bit there. So let's just change that. We can give a little bit of an offset to fix that. Let's actually just click play, see how much he's floating above the floor. If we adjust this base offset, we can see we can adjust that, and probably about minus 0.05 will fix that. Now the trouble with changing it while you're in play mode is that when we unclick play, we'll lose that setting. But one clever way of getting around that, if you right click nav mesh agent and you choose copy component, and then if you hit play to stop, as you can see we lost our base offset there. But if we just right click and do paste component values, we get it back, and then that looks a lot better. Okay, so now we're going to create our terrain. So if you open Blender, and if you have this default cube showing, you want to right click on it and then hit the delete key and click on delete. Now we want to add a plane, so to do that hold down the shift key and hit A, and then choose mesh plane. Now we want to scale this up, so if you hit the S key for scale and then type in 64 and then hit enter, and that will scale the plane up. Now you can scroll in and out with your scroll wheel. So I want to actually hide this grid here, so if you hit the N key to bring up the menu, and then if we scroll down, and we'll open up display, and then we can untick grid floor. Now I want to subdivide this plane, so we need to go into edit mode, and to do that you hit the tab key, which is a toggle. So if you hit it once, you'll see that we go into edit mode down here, and if we hit it again, we'll go back to object mode. So we want to stay in edit mode by hitting tab, and then we want to subdivide. So we do that by hitting W and then S, which is the top one on this specials menu. So hit S, and that will just subdivide once, and then we want to do that again, so that's twice, then W and S again, that's 3 times, and then W and S again, that's 4 times. Now we can switch to a top view by hitting 7 on your numeric keypad, and then we actually want to convert all these quads to triangles. So if you hold down Control and hit T, we now have our triangles. Now we want to rename this mesh from plane to terrain. So if you come into this side view here and double click on plane, and then we'll call this terrain. And then we want to create a material for this terrain. So if you click on this button here, this is the material button, and hit new, and we're going to call this material terrain. So just double click on material and rename this to matte terrain. Now I want to create a texture for this terrain. So if we click on this top menu here, and choose UV editing, and then if we click on this new button down here, and we're going to call this text terrain, and I want this to be 2048 by 2048, and click OK, and we can scroll out of this view with the scroll wheel. Now we want to sort out our UV mapping, so we want to do a UV unwrap. So in the right hand screen, if we scroll out a bit with our scroll wheel, and we want to switch to a top view, so again numeric 7, like so, and make sure that everything in here is selected. If it's not, then hit the A key, and again the A is the toggle between selecting everything and not selecting everything, so make sure everything's selected by hitting the A key. And then we do an unwrap by hitting U, and we don't want to do just a normal unwrap, we want to do a project from view. So choose project from view, and as you can see, that's projected that onto our texture on the left, like so. And we want to kind of scale this up so it uses the whole of our texture. So make sure your cursor's over the left panel, hit the A key, and then we want to scale this up, so hit S, and then if you just move your mouse outwards, then we can scale that up to just about filling that texture, like so, and then left click to apply. Now we can paint this texture a particular color by clicking on View and Paint, and if we expand this side menu here, we can just sort of pull this out. We can see that we've got our paint menu here. Now if you click on this top one here, and we want to choose Fill, and then let's choose a green color, so something like that, and then if we just click on our texture, we filled that in with a green color, like so. Now let's just save what we've got so far, just to be on the safe side. So if we go File and Save As, and then if we nip back to Unity, and we go to our terrain folder, and then right click, Show in Explorer, and let's just make sure that we go into that terrain folder, select it, Control C, copy, and then when we go back to Blender, we can just paste that in here, and then we'll call our blend file terrain, like so, and then save as Blender file. And then let's also save our texture, so if we go to Image and Save as Image, again let's just make sure that that's the correct path, and then I'm just going to create a folder under terrain called Texture. So texture, like so, and then right click on, double click on the texture folder to go into it, and then click Save as Image. Right, so now if we go back into our default view, now I want to switch from Blender Render to Cycles Render, which is a more powerful rendering engine, and it just makes it easier for us to assign our texture to our material. So if we click on Use Nodes, and then if we click on this dot to the side of color, and then if we choose Image Texture, and then in this drop down we should see our text terrain. And so now we've assigned that texture to our material. And if we want to actually see that, we can go into texture view, and you can see that our texture has been applied correctly. Now we want to start creating some mountains on our grid here. Now you can rotate in Blender by clicking on the middle mouse button and moving your mouse around like so. So get it sort of roughly like this, and then you want to hit the A key to make sure everything's deselected. Make sure you're in vertex select mode, which is this button here. And then let's start right clicking on some vertices. Now you need to hold down the shift key to select multiple vertices. So if you hold down the shift key and then right click, we can start selecting multiple vertices like this. And this might take some trial and error, something that you can experiment with, but you'll see how this works in a second. But I'm sort of selecting alternate ones and now and again a couple together just to make a little bit of variety like so. So we could just hit the G key and then we can just grab these vertices up like so. That's one way of doing it. If you want to constrain to just the Z axis, then you hit the Z, and that's the up and down axis, so that will constrain it in that way. But that doesn't look great. So if we right click to cancel that, what we can do is hit the O key, which you see that it changed down here. If I hit the O key again, you can see it's a toggle, and it toggles in and out of what Blender calls proportional editing mode. So now if we hit the G key and say Z to restrict ourselves on the Z axis, then what you can do is you can use the scroll wheel on your mouse button to change how dragging these vertices affects the vertices around it, and so you get this much gentler pulling up of the grid. So I'm going to go for something like that and left click, and then of course you can go in and just right click on individual vertices and sort of tweak them, add a bit of variety, maybe come out of proportional editing mode by hitting O, and so you can just do a little bit of variation like so. And I'm just grabbing the blue arrow to move down these vertices like so, or move them up. Now I want to do some painting directly onto this mesh. We hit the 7 on the numeric keypad, and we're viewing from the top now, and you can toggle between perspective mode and orthographic mode by hitting the 5 on the numeric keypad. So the orthographic mode is quite handy for painting, so let's leave it like that. And if we click on this drop down here and we choose texture paint, and then if we choose text draw, and let's choose a brown color, So now we can just click directly on the texture like so to do a bit of painting. Now if I Control Z to undo that. So I want to increase my radius to about 100 pixels roughly, and I want to increase my strength to full strength, and then I want to start painting in my mountains just by clicking on these vertices like so. So now I want to add a bit of snow to the top of our mountains. So if we drag the dot into the middle here and put that all the way up to the top, and let's reduce our radius down to 45 pixels, looks about right, and let's start adding some snow. And there we have some nice snow-covered mountains. Now I don't want the terrain in the middle to be quite so flat, so let's fix that now. So if we go back into edit mode, and if we shift right click and choose some vertices like this, and if we hit the O key to go into proportional edit mode, now we can choose random here, and so then if we hit G and then Z and we pull up and just start scrolling, we'll get a little bit of randomness going in there, like so. So we have a little bit of a bumpy plane in the middle there, and then I think I want to just add some hills. If you ever hit a right click on a vertices you don't want to add, you can click on it again and it'll deselect it. So I want to come out of random mode, go back to smooth mode, hit the G key. I'm going to scroll that in quite a bit. Hit the Z key. And I'll just create some hills like so. And we can hit the 5 key to go back into perspective mode to have a clearer look at our terrain. You can hold down the shift key and middle mouse button to pan around. Again, the middle mouse button on its own rotates. And I think that will do for our terrain. So let's make sure we save everything. So File, Save, and then let's save our texture, seeing as we've just edited that. So go to UV editing and then Image and Save Image. So let's look at our terrain back in Blender. So we've got our terrain now in our terrain folder. So if we drag and drop that into our hierarchy view, you can see that we now have some cool looking terrain. We can go to our materials folder and we can tweak things like the smoothness. So probably good to bring the smoothness right down. And let's bring our player up a bit because he's kind of sunk into the terrain at the moment. Now we can delete our plane because we're not going to be using that anymore. Now we've got a terrain we can walk on. And now if we select the terrain and we want to add a mesh collider to this terrain so that we actually have a collider we can walk on. So now let's rebake our nav mesh. So if you go to Window and Navigation and then hit Navigation Static here, click on Bake and hit Bake, and now we have a nav mesh on our terrain. So let's just check that works. So if we hit play now, and we can see that our character now walks across the terrain. Like so. Right, let's add some enemy AI now. So we've got our enemy, we've got our ghost, so let's bring him into our scene. And let's put him over there like so. And we need a couple of scripts to get him to work. So we'll bring in the enemy AI and the health script. Now the ghost needs a nav mesh agent, so let's add the nav mesh agent component. And again, we'll change his height to 1. And we also want to add the enemy AI script. Now the ghost is always going to chase after the player, so if we drag and drop our player onto the target parameter like so, and I'm going to set the ghost's visible range to 4, so he'll spot the player 4 units away, and then when he gets to 1 unit away he'll start hitting our player, and we'll say that he does 5 damage to our player every second. We also want to change some settings on the nav mesh agent for our ghost, so let's set his speed to 1.5, angular speed to 1000, acceleration to 100. Let's reduce his radius down to 0.1 and that should do for him. On the player, we just need to add the health script to the player, so drag and drop our health script. Now I want to make one more change to the ghost. Let's change the rotation, because he will have the similar problem to the player in that he won't be facing the correct way unless we do this. So we'll change the rotation to 90 there. And just for completeness, we'll call this ghost model. And let's set his default rotation in the scene to 90. And let's move him a little bit away from us, sort of over there. And hit the play button and see how that goes. So he can't see us because we're too far away from him, but we get a little bit closer and he starts chasing after us, and we can run away and get away from him. But if we get too close, he'll start attacking us and he will kill us. But we're not doing anything on death yet, so we'll sort that out very soon. Now let's create a very simple UI that will display a button telling us that we've died and that we can click it to restart the game. So let's do that now. So if we right click in the hierarchy view and we choose UI and button, and let's just double click that button, and if we click on 2D and scroll out a bit, we can see that our button is outside the viewable area. So let's just drag it up so now you can see it. And let's anchor it to the bottom of our screen. So if we click on this button here in our rect transform and hold down the Shift and the Alt key and then click on this button here, it will send our button to the bottom of the screen and it will also anchor it down there. This means that no matter the resolution, our button will always be visible at the bottom of our screen here. Now let's expand this button and click on text, and we want to say something along the lines of "you died!" exclamation mark, click to restart. And we can see that our button isn't big enough, so let's fix that now. So if we double click on our button, make sure that this button up here is clicked so that we can drag it and make it a little bit bigger so we can see all our text. Now let's rename our button to button_restart, and I'm going to bring in another script now called player, and let's drop this onto our player like so. We need to hook up these two parameters here, so we want to hook this up to our button. So if we drag and drop our button onto the button restart parameter, and then we want to drag and drop our player model, not our player but our player model, onto the player model parameter like so. And if we hit play now, you'll see the result of adding this player script. So if we get too close to the ghost comes, damages us, and then kills us. And then the "you died, click to restart" shows. If we click it, at the moment it doesn't do anything, so we need to hook that up. So if we click on our button restart, on click, list is empty. We want to hit on this plus button here, and if we drag and drop our player, and then we want to go player, restart game, click play. Get too close to our ghost comes, kills us. You died, click to restart, click on the button, and our game restarts. Now as you can see, when we click restart, the game restarts but looks a lot darker, and we will fix that very soon. Now at the moment when we click play and we click around our terrain, we can easily go off camera, which isn't great, and our camera angle also isn't great. So let's fix that now. So we need to bring in a script called camera follow, so let's bring that in now, and we want to drag and drop that onto our camera, and the camera is going to follow our player around. So let's drag and drop our player onto target, and if we quickly hit play, we can see that now our camera follows our player, but the angle still isn't great, so let's fix that now. So let's sort out our camera angle now. So the first thing we want to do is hide our button. So select the button and click on this tick box here to get rid of that. And let's click on our main camera, and we're going to rotate the camera 22 degrees down. We're going to give it a height of about 6, and then we'll change our Z to about -6. And that's the sort of camera angle that I like, but of course you change those settings to the angle that you like. And as you can see, that works very nicely. Let's create a tree now in Blender. So open Blender, then Shift A, Mesh, and choose Cylinder. Now we want to change our vertices to 6. Hit enter. Then if we go into edit mode by hitting tab, then we want to make sure that we're in face select mode, so hit this button here. Hit A to deselect everything, and then right click on that top face to select it, and then we're just going to scale that top face down by hitting the S key and just scale it in a bit like so. Now we want to do an extrude by hitting E, but immediately hit the right mouse button. And then now if you hit S, we can scale that extrusion right out like so. And we want to scale it out quite a bit. I'm scrolling out with my mouse wheel. And then if we hit E and drag up to extrude up, we'll extrude up to about there. And then if we hit S to scale in, and we can scale in to about there. Again hit E and then right click immediately, and then S to scale out the extrusion to about there. Hit the E key, drag up, left click to apply, then hit S to scale down to about there. Maybe pull that up a tiny bit like so. Again hit the E key, right click again, then hit the S key, scale out to about there. Maybe a bit less, about there. Then E, extrude upward like so, and then S to scale in, and we'll scale in to roughly a point, and maybe just pull this up like so. So we have our tree now in Blender, so let's assign some materials to this tree. So first of all we'll rename our mesh to tree, and then we'll click on this materials button, hit new, Double click in here and choose matte trunk. This will be our tree trunk. And if we change the diffuse color by clicking on here, and let's make this a brown color like so. Let's just drag this down, add another material, click new, double click here, matte tree. This will be our main tree, and click on diffuse again. This time we're going for a green color like so. Now we want to assign this material to all these faces up here. So what we want to do is click on this limit selection to visible. We want to untick that so that we can see the back faces. And if we hit the B key on our keyboard, and then we can drag a rectangle all around here, and hopefully we'll select all our faces. We've missed a few, so let's shift right click on this face here, this face here, this face here. Let's just untick limit selection and click on this one here, and so we should have all those top faces now selected. And then let's click on our matte tree material and click assign. And if we hit A, we can see that we've assigned our materials correctly. So let's save that. So click File, Save As, and we want to put this in our tree folder, and let's call this tree. Click Save. Now actually you probably want to move this tree up so that it's sitting on the ground, so let's just do that. So if you hit A to select everything, and then let's just drag up with our Z arrow, and that'll just about do, and Control S to save again. So let's create some rocks in Blender now. So open Blender, do Shift A, and then choose Mesh Icosphere. Let's rename this icosphere to rock. And let's create a material by hitting this material tab, then hit new, and we're going to call this matte rock. And let's change this to a dark brown color, like so. So now if you click on this spanner icon and hit add modifier and choose decimate, we can adjust this ratio here to remove faces, make it a little bit more rock-like. If we hit tab to go into edit mode, let's scale it on the S, so S then Z to flatten it a bit, and let's pull it up so it's sitting on the ground a bit, and maybe hit S and Y to elongate it a bit. Hit the tab key, I think we have our first rock there. So if we hit File and Save As, let's make sure that we're in the rocks folder there, and let's save this as rock_1 and click Save. So let's make a smaller rock. So if we hit tab and we scale this down, and let's lower it a bit, and let's hit A, let's go into proportional editing mode, by hitting O, and let's grab one of these faces and pull it out like that. Give it a bit more of an interesting shape. Hit tab. That'll do for our second rock. Hit file, save as, and we'll call this rock 2. Hit tab, hit A a couple of times to select everything. Let's scale this up a bit. Move it up like so. Let's scale this down a bit more. Let's scale it on the Y. Let's decimate it a bit more. I need to go into object mode to do that. And that will do for our third rock. File, save as. Rock 3. Now if we hit file and new, reload startup file. Right, we now want to make a tool rock. So if we click Shift A and create an icosphere, let's zoom in a bit. And if we scale on the Z, so press S then Z, and we'll scale up like so. And then if we move our rock up a bit like that, and then if we go back into object mode and let's add our decimate modifier again, and let's do something like I want to make sure our rock's a little bit flat on the top, so let's just select that one, scale it down a bit, and do the same with the bottom one. Let's try that. Yeah, that's looking a bit better. Let's just hit A and just move it down a bit. And I think that'll do for our tool rock. So let's call this rock underscore tool. So just rename the mesh there, and we'll click on our materials tab and we'll call this matte rock tool. And again we'll change it to a kind of dark brown. And let's save our rock, so file, save as, and we're going to call this rock underscore tool. Save. Okay, so let's start placing our rocks around our scene. So let's put the tool rocks in first. Let's come out of this 2D mode. and I kind of want our tool rocks to create a circle around our ghost. So let's move these rocks sort of back here like so, and if you select this tool rock and then Control D, it'll duplicate it, and repeat, Control D, and let's put our ghost in the middle of these rocks. And we can rotate these rocks a little bit to make them look a little bit more random. Now let's place some other rocks around. Now if we don't like the colour of these rocks, or we want to make the rocks all the same colour, we can actually share the materials. So let's have a look. If we look at this tool rock, we can expand the materials and we see that we've got this matte tool rock we're using. But we can kind of use the same rock material for all our rocks if we want to, by just dragging and dropping like so. And then we can go in and edit this rock material, and let's say we want it to look a little bit like that. So I'm going to speed up the video now. I'm just placing rocks, dragging and dropping them, and we'll see where that leaves us. Let's now place some trees. So if we click on the tree folder, let's drag our tree out into our scene. And as we can see, our tree is a little on the large side. So an easy way to fix that is to just go into our scale factor, and let's change that to say roughly half the size. And that looks a little bit more sensible. So let's place some trees around our scene. Again, just select the tree and Control D. Now if we click play, what we'll find is that we'll quite happily walk through these rocks, and the ghost will quite happily walk through the rocks, which is probably okay for a ghost, but not for us really. So what we need to do is we need to set all these assets to static, and actually when you do that, you'll see, if I just lift this up a bit, you'll see that our meshes will complain because we didn't set any UVs up for them for light mapping. Now there's two ways we can fix this. I might as well show you both ways quickly. So one way we can do it is we can just select all our assets and we can click generate light map UVs, and that should make that error message go away. Another way we can do it is actually open these assets up again in Blender and actually create some UVs for them. So if we go to UV editing and we make sure that we're in edit mode and everything's selected, then unwrap, And we can do light map pack, which is a real simple way of getting some UVs that are light map friendly. So if we then just click save here, and let's do this for all our rocks. And we want to do this for a tree as well. So we set all these game objects to static, and now we want to go to Window, Navigation, make sure we've got our terrain highlighted, and then if we go to Bake and click Bake, you should see that our nav mesh takes into account all the static meshes in the scene. And what that means is if we hit play, we will walk around these tall rocks and some of the larger rocks, but the smaller rocks will clamber over, which works for what we want to do. One thing I just want to do is make our tree material just a little bit darker, just so that the trees stand out from the grass a bit. And I'll reduce my smoothing down to 0 as well to help with that. Okay, that looks a little bit better. Okay, so the final thing we want to do is add a little bit of post-processing to this scene to make it look a little bit nicer. So if we go to Window and Asset Store, and if you type in post-processing, hit enter, you see that Unity has released this post-processing stack. So if you click on that and download and import that into your project, click import. So now you should have this post-processing folder. If we go back to our scene view and let's click on our main camera, and we want to add a component called post-processing behavior. And this takes a profile which we need to create. So if you go to your game folder and let's right click in there, do create and post-processing profile. And I won't bother renaming it because that's fine. And this is where you define what sort of post-processing you want to apply. Now we have to specify that we're going to use this profile. So if we go back to our main camera and let's drag and drop this post-processing profile into here like so. Go back to it now and let's tick ambient occlusion. So let's add a bit of depth of field, so put in 8 here, 6, and we'll just increase that so we get a little bit of blur on distant objects. Color grading, We click on that. Filmic is a nice place to start, and then I quite like linear, and then you can play around with these settings to get the kind of look you're going for. And then we can add a bit of grain. That's a bit too much, so let's dial our intensity down a bit. Pull this down a bit. Size, bring that down to about there, and untick coloured, so looks quite good. And then you can actually add a vignette effect if you want. And if we hit play, we can see what that looks like. Okay, so let's go through our Animesh script now. So this first string here is the name of the current animation that we want to play. Here is an array of all our animation data. So here we would set up, say, walk and the two meshes that correspond to walk, and idle and the single mesh that corresponds to that. So that holds all our animation data. This mesh filter here enables us to change our mesh. This is our current Animesh data. So this will actually hold, say if we're in doing the walk animation, this will hold the two meshes that we need for the walk animation. Now this elapsed time here is the amount of time that's elapsed since the beginning of the animation frame. So once this gets bigger than this frame time here, we increase our index, this index here, and essentially move on to our next frame of animation and zero this. So this is what our animation data looks like. So we have our name, so this would be something like walk. Our frame time defaults to 0.2 seconds. And then the meshes that make up this animation. So for our project, the walk animation consisted of two meshes, the player idle mesh and the player underscore walk mesh. So this is a helper method where we supply the name, say walk, and then that will give us the data corresponding to that walk animation. That's the way we get to easily get to the two meshes that we need, for instance. Now the awake method is called automatically by Unity. So we use the awake method to set up any of our parameters that we're going to be using for the life of our game object. So we definitely want our mesh filter because we want to use that all the time to keep swapping out our meshes. So that's a very handy place to initialize everything. Now the update method is called every single frame, and that is again called automatically by Unity. And so we're going to use this to keep track of the elapsed time and to swap our meshes when we need to. So the first time through, or when our animation changes, so maybe we've got idle set up in here, the very first time we play idle, it will come into here, or if we change this from idle to walk, it will also come into here, and it will essentially load the animation data that we need, and then it will zero our elapsed time. It presumes that we're going to want to play our animations right from the start, and we'll then play the first frame of that animation. Otherwise, we'll call this playAnimFrame method, and we'll send it the amount of time that's passed since last time this update method was called. This is what this delta time is. And this playAnimFrame plays the correct animation frame depending on where we are in the elapsed time. So like I said earlier, if our elapsed time is greater than our frame time, then we're going to reset everything and move our index onto the next frame. Otherwise, we're going to increment our elapsed time, and we're just checking here to make sure that we haven't increased our index beyond the number of meshes we have, and if we have, then we want to loop back to our first mesh, and here is where we assign our mesh. Okay, so let's go through our click to move script now. Now the main method in our click to move script, which is doing the interesting stuff, is this handle touch. And what this is doing is whenever we click on our screen, we're going to create a ray from where we click on the screen into our scene. And so this is what this line here, it creates a ray that beams into our scene right from where our current mouse position is. And then that ray is going to beam into our scene and it's going to hit the floor. This mask here essentially sort of is a way of avoiding certain objects maybe in our scene that we don't want to, we want to be able to pass our ray through and ignore. In our particular example, we weren't that bothered by this, but we could actually make sure that our rocks and anything else is on a different layer, and essentially only our floor gets hit by this ray, which is probably something you may want to do if you expand on this project. So this ray is going to hit our floor somewhere, and we're going to say, well, that's where we want our destination to be. And so we've got this nav mesh agent on our player, and this sets our destination. And then we're going to say that we actually want to start moving. So that's what this line here does. So we're calling this in our update method whenever we click our left mouse button. So this 0 here corresponds to our left click. And this particular bit of code here is just basically saying, well, if we're moving, then let's walk. Let's play the walk animation. But if we're not moving, if we've stopped, then let's play the idle animation. And then we have this onDeath method here, which actually will get called from the player script. The player script actually sends a message to all the scripts on the game object saying call the onDeath method, and so this will get called when our player dies. And we want to say, well, let's not allow our character to move once we're dead, which is a pretty good idea. And then we want to make sure that we are stopped because we are dead, and we also want to make sure that we're not playing any walking animations, that we're idle. So that's about it for the click to move script. Okay, our health script is fairly simple. We have a starting health and a current health. When we enable our game object, we're going to make sure our current health is equal to our starting health. So our current health when we start off should become 10. We're also going to make sure we're not dead, so we'll set dead to false. We've got a public method here that essentially allows enemies to do damage to us. So an enemy can call this and say he wants to do 5 damage to us, and so if the enemy does 5 damage, we will take that damage off our current health, and then we're going to check to see, does our health fall below 0, If so, then we'll call the def method, and the def method sets is dead to true, and it also calls on the onDef method on any scripts also on this game object. So this is where our click to move onDef method gets called. Now our player script has a reference to our restart button so that it can hide it when we first start the game and then display it when we die. And the other thing it does is it turns the player model on its side when we die. Oh, and it also handles restarting the game. So this is what we bind to our restart button, so that when we click our restart button, this method gets called, and this essentially loads the initial scene again. So the enemy AI script is using a finite state machine pattern here to switch between certain methods. So the finite state machine will jump between being idle to following our player to hitting our player, depending on certain criteria. So when we enable the enemy, the ghost in this particular case, then that will call this method here, and this will actually start our finite state machine, and we'll go into this method, which will then be called over and over again because we're in this while loop here. And when we're in this while loop, it will constantly check to see if we can see our target, which in this particular case is our player. And if our target is in visible range and he's not dead, then we're going to start following our player. And so by changing state to state.following, we will jump now into this method, and we will go round and round in this particular loop. And so while we're going round and round in this loop, we will check to see if the target is in visible range. If he's not, we'll jump back to being idle by setting the state back to idle. But if he is in visible range, then we're going to set our destination to be the position of our player, and we're going to start moving towards our player. And then we're going to start checking over and over again whether we're in hitting range of the player, and if we are, we're going to change state to state.hitting, which means that we'll jump into this method. And we'll go round and round in this while loop. And what we'll do is we'll make sure that we've now stopped, so the ghost will stop. If the player moves away from the ghost, then we'll jump back to being idle. But what we'll also do is we'll, seeing as we're hitting the player, we're going to do damage to the player by calling take damage on the health component attached to our player. And we're going to do this every second.